He stood in handcuffs, mocked by the courtroom. But then he pulled out a legal document, one he filed, that exposed hidden evidence and flipped the entire case. The judge froze. The room gasped. What happened next left everyone speechless. But let's start from the beginning. The courtroom was uncomfortably quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest. Wood-paneled walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and a stale, recycled air gave the room the smell of anxiety and authority. Spectators shifted in their chairs, clutching their handbags or cell phones, as if something electric were about to happen. But their eyes weren't on the judge or the prosecutor or even the case at hand. They were all watching the boy. 17-year-old Tyler Brooks shuffled through the side door, led by a uniformed bailiff. His wrists were cuffed tightly in front of him, and the metal clinked with every movement. He wore a faded gray hoodie that hung off his slim shoulders, jeans 2 sizes too large, and sneakers with the soles nearly peeling off. His hair was a bit too long, unkempt, and his expression unreadable, not from defiance but from calculation. He wasn't scared. He wasn't angry. He was bracing. Whispers rippled through the gallery like wind in tall grass. "Is that the kid who yelled at the judge last week? I heard he tried to tell the lawyer how to do his job. Thought he was some kind of genius. Idiot." The judge, Honorable Ronald Monroe, a man in his 60s with slicked-back silver hair and a reputation for his no-nonsense courtroom demeanor, peered down from the bench. He adjusted his glasses, narrowed his eyes, and let out a slow, deliberate sigh. "Mr. Brooks," he said, voice cool as marble, "welcome back." Tyler didn't respond. His gaze stayed fixed on the floor, just beyond his scuffed sneakers. His fingers twitched against the metal cuffs. Everyone thought he was a troublemaker, a smart-mouthed kid with a chip on his shoulder, and maybe that's exactly what they needed to believe. Judge Monroe tapped his gavel once. "You are here today to answer for your behavior during the ongoing case of State versus Malik Brooks, your brother. The court previously found your interjections disruptive and inappropriate. Do you have anything you'd like to say for yourself before I issue a sanction?" Tyler lifted his head slowly, locking eyes with the judge. His voice, when it finally came, wasn't loud or cocky. It was steady, controlled. "I didn't mean to disrespect the court, Your Honor. I just didn't want my brother going to prison for something he didn't do." A hush fell over the room again, but this time it was heavier, more serious. In the back row, his foster mother, a tall, stiff woman named Linda Cartwright, sat with her arms crossed, her jaw tight. She didn't react to Tyler's words, didn't move a muscle. When he glanced toward her, her eyes flicked away. The judge leaned back, folding his hands. "Mr. Brooks, you're not a lawyer. You're not qualified to speak in my courtroom. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir." "And yet you attempted to challenge the arguments of a licensed public defender." "Because he was wrong," Tyler said quietly. That got the attention of the defense attorney slouched in his chair next to Malik. The man turned and gave Tyler a look filled with venom and exhaustion. Monroe arched an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "I said he was wrong. He didn't question the store clerk's testimony. He didn't bring up the lack of fingerprints on the weapon. He let the prosecution say Malik had no alibi when I was with him the entire night." The judge narrowed his eyes. "And where were you during cross-examination, Mr. Brooks?" Tyler didn't blink. "In the hallway, because I wasn't on the witness list." A low ripple moved through the spectators again. Monroe held up a hand to silence them. His jaw clenched. "Let me guess," the judge said. "You think you know the law better than the professionals?" "I don't think I'm better," Tyler replied. "I just think I'm paying attention." The courtroom froze. It was the kind of line you only hear once, bold, raw, and true in a way that couldn't be ignored. But the boldness didn't make Tyler look strong. It made him look alone. His brother Malik, seated in his orange jumpsuit, looked down at the table in front of him. He hadn't said a word since Tyler was brought in. His hands were clenched, and his shoulders were tight, not from anger, but from shame. He never wanted his little brother to be dragged into this. Judge Monroe glanced toward the bailiff. "Mr. Brooks is not to speak again unless directly addressed. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Honor." The bailiff nodded. "Yes, sir," Tyler echoed. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Then let's proceed." The court moved on, but the atmosphere was changed. The gallery, once so quick to sneer, now watched Tyler with something closer to curiosity. The courtroom wasn't used to sincerity from someone in a hoodie and cuffs. During the hearing, Tyler was left seated alone by the wall, his hands still bound. He stared at the back of Malik's head, silently willing someone, anyone, to see what he saw. A case built on assumption, sloppiness, and fear. Malik didn't rob that store. Tyler knew that. But knowing wasn't enough. The system didn't care what he knew. It only cared what it could prove, and who was allowed to speak. Tyler glanced down at his notebook. He had memorized over 20 federal cases, scribbled statutes in the margins, and mapped out the contradictions in the witness statements. None of it mattered, not if no one listened. In the back, Linda Cartwright stood and walked toward the door. She paused, looked back at Tyler, and then left without a word. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed like a gavel. Tyler's hands clenched in his lap. This wasn't just about his brother anymore. This was personal. The court clerk's voice rang out as the formal charges against Tyler Brooks were read. Each word, though spoken without emotion, cut like a blade. Disruption of courtroom proceedings, contempt of court, unauthorized objection during trial, interfering with counsel. Every phrase added another layer of shame in the eyes of the spectators. Even though most of them didn't fully understand the legal terms, they understood what they were supposed to feel. This kid had crossed a line. And in a courtroom, crossing lines came with consequences. Tyler sat silently, eyes forward. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. But his jaw was tight, his hands still cuffed, now resting in his lap. The public defender, Mr. Davis, rose to speak next. A man in his mid-40s with thinning hair and bags under his eyes, Davis looked like someone who stopped caring years ago. His suit was wrinkled, his tie uneven. He cleared his throat lazily. "Your Honor," he began, not even glancing in Tyler's direction, "this young man has made a mockery of this courtroom. He's attempted to lecture licensed attorneys and interjected without cause during a formal proceeding. I ask the court to consider a juvenile sentence or a week in detention to set an example. This behavior cannot continue." The judge nodded slowly, thoughtfully. Then he looked at Tyler. "Mr. Brooks, do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Tyler's voice came, calm and clear. "I do." "Then explain." Monroe leaned forward, his voice edged with condescension. "Explain why you thought you, a 17-year-old with no degree, no license, no standing, could tell a courtroom how to conduct a felony trial." Tyler paused. The silence stretched. Then, with a voice just slightly trembling, he answered, "Because no one else would." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "I sat through every hearing. I read every page of the case file. Mr. Davis never questioned the inconsistencies in the timeline. He never asked why the security footage from the gas station across the street was missing. He never even mentioned that Malik has an alibi. Me. I was with him the whole night." "You're not an alibi if you're a relative," Davis muttered, not even looking up from his folder. I'm also not a liar, Tyler snapped back. The judge's gavel slammed down. That's enough. The sound echoed off the wood panels like thunder. Mr. Brooks, Monroe continued, this is a court of law, not a classroom. You do not get to challenge my officers or argue with legal counsel. I wasn't trying to argue, Tyler replied, his voice steadying. I was trying to save my brother. The judge exhaled and sat back in his chair. Well, you failed at both. A soft gasp came from someone in the back row. Tyler's foster mother, Linda Cartwright, didn't even flinch. She just shook her head slowly and looked down at her lap. The pain in Tyler's chest flared for a moment. Not from what the judge had said, but from the fact that no one stood up for him. Not the lawyer, not his foster parent, not even Malik. He turned slightly to look at his brother, who sat beside Mr. Davis at the defense table, arms shackled, eyes blank. Malik hadn't made eye contact with him once since the hearing began. His silence was deafening. And yet, Tyler didn't hate him. Not for this. Not even a little. The courtroom moved on. The prosecutor began reading witness statements for Malik's case. Tyler was led to the side bench by the bailiff, a small, isolated seat reserved for those being reprimanded. He sat there, hands still cuffed, back straight, eyes fixed on the proceedings. The statement from the store clerk was read. The man had identified Malik as the robber who fled the store with $200 in cash, but Tyler remembered clearly. Malik hadn't left the house at all that night. They'd stayed up watching old episodes of Law and Order, ironically enough. Malik had been pacing the living room, talking about how tired he was of being watched every time he entered a gas station. Tyler had taken notes, just in case, because something told him Malik was walking into danger, not out of guilt, but because of where he lived, what he looked like, and the way the world treated him. But none of that mattered here. Not to this courtroom. Not to the people judging them with quiet smiles and crossed arms. Court will take a 20-minute recess, the judge finally announced. Defendant Brooks is to remain in custody. The spectators rose. Papers shuffled. Voices returned to their usual whispers. Did you see that kid? Thought he was some kind of lawyer. Guess now he knows his place. Stupid punk. Got what he deserved. Tyler sat still. He didn't look at them. He didn't move. But inside, something was shifting. Not breaking, not cracking, but hardening. In the empty corridor outside the courtroom, Tyler was escorted to a bench by the security doors. The bailiff left him there, uncuffed but watched. The hallway smelled like cleaning fluid and dust. There were no windows. He looked down at his hands. The red marks from the cuffs were deep. You okay, son? The voice came from a few feet away. An older man, dressed in a janitor's uniform, was mopping the corner near the vending machine. He was in his late 60s with creased skin and tired, thoughtful eyes. Tyler nodded stiffly. Yeah? The man paused. I saw what you did in there. That was brave. Tyler gave a humorless chuckle. Didn't feel brave. Felt useless. The janitor leaned on his mop. Useless doesn't get the judge to go quiet like that. Useless doesn't quote case law from memory. You've got something, son. Don't let them take it from you. Tyler looked up. Their eyes met. For the first time that day, someone wasn't looking at him with disgust. He whispered, I don't think they ever gave me a chance. The janitor smiled. Then you take one. The courtroom emptied slowly. People filed out in groups, muttering under their breath, glancing once more at the boy still seated on the bench like he was a broken machine left in a corner. Outdated, malfunctioning, not worth fixing. Tyler remained motionless, a statue in street clothes, his back pressed against the cold wooden paneling of the wall. His wrists still bore the red imprint of the handcuffs, and even though the bailiff had taken them off before the recess, it felt like they were still on. The phantom weight of humiliation lingered. No one spoke to him. No one offered a glance of sympathy. His foster mother had disappeared before the judge even finished speaking, her heels clicking a sharp final rhythm down the tiled corridor. There was no one else waiting for him. No one who cared if he stayed or walked out the door, assuming the door would even open for someone like him. He looked toward the defense table. It was empty now, except for the discarded papers left behind by Mr. Davis, scribbled notes, a yellow legal pad with only 2 lines written, and a coffee-stained manila folder. Tyler could see from where he sat that it didn't even contain all the files from Malik's case. He'd gone through those files in the public records room last week. There were missing affidavits, missing timestamps, missing Hart. That folder, left like trash on the desk, was the perfect metaphor for how the system treated people like Malik. Like himself. The judge had called a recess, but the damage was already done. Not just to the case, to Tyler's spirit. You thought they'd listen if you spoke up. You thought they'd see you. A sudden, burning shame welled up behind his eyes, but he forced it back. Crying now would only make the voices worse. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the floor as if he could find a different reality between the tiles. One where people didn't laugh at him for caring too much. One where Malik wasn't shackled like a criminal for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. One where knowledge meant power. Even when you were poor, young, and alone. He could still hear their voices in his head. He's a troublemaker. Always thought he was smarter than everyone else. That's what happens when you try to act grown. He clenched his fists and felt the sting in his palms. His nails had dug into his skin. Hard. Not enough to bleed, just enough to ground himself. The hallway buzzed faintly with voices from other rooms. Somewhere, another trial was starting. Somewhere, someone else's fate was being decided by strangers in robes and badges. It all blended into white noise. Just another day in court. Then, slowly, a quiet voice pulled him back. "You know," someone said, "if you'd worn a suit, they might have listened." Tyler looked up, startled. A tall, thin man with a dust-gray janitor uniform stood by the vending machine, sipping from a lukewarm paper cup. It was the same man who had nodded to him earlier. His face was lined, his posture slightly bent, but his eyes were sharp. Too sharp for someone who was supposed to be invisible. "I don't own a suit," Tyler replied. His voice was flat, tired. The man shrugged. "Didn't think so. That ain't the problem anyway." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "No?" The man shook his head. "You could walk in there wearing gold-plated shoes, kid. They still wouldn't see you." That stung more than Tyler expected. Maybe because it felt true. He let the silence return, but the janitor wasn't finished. "I've been mopping these floors for 27 years, he said. "Seen gang leaders cry, seen CEOs lie, seen little girls tell the truth louder than grown men ever could. But you? You walked in there, chained up, and still made that judge stop talking. That don't happen every day." Tyler scoffed bitterly. "And what did it change? My brother's still in a jumpsuit. The lawyer still won't fight for him. The judge still hates me. Nothing changed." The janitor leaned against his mop. "You changed, and they noticed." Tyler didn't reply. He didn't know how. His throat tightened. "Name's Eli, by the way," the janitor said, extending a hand. His grip was warm, calloused, honest. "You got a name?" "Tyler," he said quietly. "Well, Tyler," Eli said, "if you know what Brady v. Maryland means, and you've got the guts to bring it up in front of a judge, then you're already ahead of half the folks who work in that building." Tyler looked at him, unsure whether it was a compliment or a warning. "Don't mean they'll listen yet," Eli continued, "but it means you're dangerous. Not because you're loud, because you're right." That word echoed in Tyler's chest like a drumbeat. Right. He had been right, hadn't he? About the missing footage, about the timeline, about the incompetence. But in a system built on routine and reputation, being right wasn't enough. Not until someone forced the truth into the light. Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "You didn't get this from me," he said, handing it over discreetly. "Take a look inside when you're alone." Tyler took it without question. "You've got a voice, kid. Don't let anyone lock it up. Not even a judge." Then Eli was gone, disappearing down the corridor like a shadow, mop squeaking against the tile. Tyler sat for a moment, stunned, the envelope burning in his hand. He didn't open it. Not yet, not here. But for the first time that day, he didn't feel completely alone. And in a building built to silence people like him, that was a start. Court came back into session with its usual mechanical rhythm, the low murmur of shuffling papers, the creak of wooden benches, the sharp click of heels across the linoleum floor. Spectators trickled back to their seats, faces still carrying a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Tyler was already in his seat, wrists unbound now, but the invisible weight of suspicion still wrapped tightly around him. He sat upright and silent, eyes forward, face still. But inside, the storm had started. The judge returned to the bench. "Court is back in session for State v. Malik Brooks. Prosecution, continue." The prosecutor rose and resumed reading witness depositions with the cold detachment of someone reciting from a script. No urgency, no cracks in the voice. Just another day, another case. Malik sat beside his lawyer, staring down, jaw clenched. Tyler scanned the courtroom. No sign of his foster mother, no supporters. Just the same sea of unfamiliar faces, bored, judgmental, detached. All of them watching, none of them seeing. Then it happened. Mr. Davis, Malik's public defender, rose from his seat and began questioning a police officer, the one who arrested Malik. "Officer Reynolds," Davis said, "was my client found with any stolen money on his person?" "No," the officer replied plainly. "Was the security camera at the store functional that night?" "No, sir. Store owner said the system was down." Tyler frowned. That was a lie. He had been to the store. He had spoken to the clerk's cousin, who mentioned offhandedly that there was another camera across the street at the gas station, one that was working. Tyler had followed that lead. And more than that, he had filed a request under the Justice Friend provision in juvenile court to access the footage. The footage showed Malik not entering the store at all. Malik had never even crossed the street. So why was no one talking about it? Why wasn't Mr. Davis doing his job? Tyler's stomach turned. He looked at the judge, then back at the defense table. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears. Every cell in his body screamed that if he didn't speak now, it would be over. He stood up. "I object." The words shot through the courtroom like a whip crack. Everyone froze. The judge's gavel slammed down almost instantly. "Mr. Brooks, sit. Down." "I have evidence," Tyler said loudly, clearly. "Evidence that contradicts Officer Reynolds' testimony. Evidence the court hasn't seen." "Mr. Brooks," the judge's voice now had a dangerous edge, "you are not authorized to speak. You are not an attorney. If you interrupt this proceeding again, I will have you removed." "I subpoenaed footage from the gas station across the street." Tyler pressed on, breathing fast but refusing to look away. "It shows Malik never entered the store. The footage is time-stamped. It proves he was on the other side of the street the whole time." A shocked wave of murmurs swept across the room. The judge stared at him, stunned into silence for the first time. The prosecutor blinked, visibly unsettled. "There's been no such evidence submitted to our office." It was submitted through the juvenile court system, Tyler interrupted, holding up a folded, creased document. Filed under Clause 12B, the Justice Friend Clause. I followed the rules. The footage was delivered to the clerk's office 3 days ago. You just ignored it. Gasps echoed across the gallery. The courtroom, moments ago a stage for routine injustice, was suddenly alive. Judge Monroe motioned to the bailiff. "Bring me that document." The courtroom was dead silent as the bailiff took the paper from Tyler and delivered it to the bench. Monroe unfolded it. His eyes scanned the form. There, in careful block print, was Tyler's name. His handwritten justification. A citation of the clause that granted any citizen, even a minor, the right to submit evidence on behalf of a defendant if they could prove it was in pursuit of justice. And it had been approved, signed by a clerk, stamped with a file number. His eyes darted back to Tyler. "You wrote this?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You filed this request. You cited correct legal procedure, and you did this? As a civilian?" Tyler nodded. "Because no one else would." The silence was so dense it felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. Monroe set the paper down and slowly removed his glasses. For the first time, there was no contempt in his expression. There was something closer to disbelief, or even respect. "Mr. Davis," the judge said slowly, "were you aware of this footage?" Davis shifted uncomfortably. "I had not reviewed that specific evidence." The judge's voice sharpened. "Then perhaps the court needs a moment to do what you failed to." The bailiff left the courtroom to retrieve the footage from the clerk's office. Spectators leaned forward in their seats. Even the prosecutor looked rattled now. Tyler didn't move. His chest heaved, but he held his ground. He had done it. He had forced them to see. But it wasn't over. Not yet. It took only 12 minutes for the bailiff to return, but for everyone seated in that courtroom, it felt like hours. He stepped back inside, holding a slim silver flash drive. Official, sealed in evidence plastic. Judge Monroe reached forward and took it himself, breaking the seal. He handed it to the clerk and nodded toward the mounted screen on the wall. "Cue it," he ordered, voice terse. The clerk plugged in the device, tapped a few keys, and the courtroom lights dimmed automatically. All eyes were on the screen. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, elbows on the bench, lips pressed tightly together. Then the video began. The angle was from high above the gas station across the street from the convenience store in question. A wide surveillance lens captured the sidewalk, storefront, and the intersection between them. The timestamp read 8:41 p.m., the exact time the robbery allegedly occurred. On the footage, Malik Brooks could be seen standing beside a bicycle, pacing nervously. He was outside the gas station, not across the street, not anywhere near the alleged crime scene. He scratched his head, looked at his phone, and leaned against the building wall. Then, suddenly, sirens in the background. Malik turned, startled. And that was it. The entire courtroom sat frozen, as if caught in collective disbelief. Tyler had been telling the truth. And not only that, the video had been there, accessible, unhidden. The system just hadn't bothered to look, or worse, had ignored it entirely. The prosecutor's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Davis, Malik's own public defender, looked down at the table as if he wished he could melt through it. Spectators began whispering louder now, not mocking Tyler, but talking about him. "Isn't that the same kid the judge yelled at? He found that footage himself. Did he really file the paperwork alone?" Judge Monroe raised a hand, commanding silence. "Turn the lights up," he said quietly. The clerk complied. The room returned to full brightness, but the tension had only grown heavier. Monroe glanced over at Davis. "You had full access to discovery. Why was this not presented in your defense?" Davis cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I did not consider footage from an unaffiliated property to be relevant. Monroe cut him off, voice like steel. Exculpatory evidence showing the defendant was not at the scene of the crime was irrelevant? Davis's face flushed deep red. He didn't respond. The judge shifted his gaze to the prosecutor. And your office received no notification of this? We were not informed of the supplemental filing. It was not flagged as priority. That's not an answer. Monroe's voice had turned razor-sharp now. You chose not to look. He paused, then turned to the courtroom at large, scanning the rows of stunned spectators. Finally, his eyes rested on Tyler. You're 17 years old? Yes, Your Honor. And you discovered this camera, identified its relevance to your brother's defense, and filed a motion to retrieve the footage, correctly citing the Justice Friend Clause in juvenile court? Yes, sir. Did anyone help you? Tyler shook his head. No. Monroe let that answer hang in the air. The room had no breath left in it. Then the judge leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and simply said, This court owes you an apology. Gasps again. One woman in the back even covered her mouth. Tyler blinked. He wasn't sure he'd heard him right. An apology? From the judge? I dismissed you because I assumed, Monroe continued, because of how you looked, how you acted, because of your age. But in all my years on the bench, I've never seen someone with no formal training file a motion with such precision, let alone change the entire trajectory of a trial. He paused. You didn't disrupt this court. You reminded it of its purpose. Tyler couldn't move. He sat frozen, heart pounding so loud he could barely hear what came next. Mr. Brooks, Monroe said, this time with a strange softness in his voice. You may be young, but today you demonstrated something rare. Not just intelligence, but courage, the kind this system was built to serve, and too often forgets. He turned toward the prosecutor. At this time, I am issuing an immediate review of the charges against Malik Brooks. Court is adjourned until further notice. This trial is not over, but it will not continue until this footage is thoroughly analyzed. He stood, banged the gavel once, and left the courtroom. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in murmurs, camera clicks, shocked disbelief. The gallery had just witnessed the unthinkable. A teenage boy had walked into a courtroom in handcuffs and walked out as the person who had saved his brother from wrongful conviction. Malik turned in his seat, wide-eyed. He looked at Tyler as if seeing him for the first time. Tyler stood up slowly, numb, the weight of adrenaline still crashing through his chest. His legs felt shaky, but he held steady. As he walked toward Malik, his brother rose from the defense table, chains still on his wrists. They stared at each other for a long second. Then Malik whispered, How did you even... Tyler shrugged. Someone had to. For the first time in weeks, Malik smiled. It was small, but real. In the back of the courtroom, Eli the janitor stood near the door, arms crossed, a quiet smirk on his face. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Because Tyler Brooks had just done what no one thought possible. He made justice listen. The silence in the courtroom after the judge exited was unlike anything Tyler had ever experienced. It wasn't relief. It wasn't victory. It was a suspension, like the moment just before lightning touches ground. Every pair of eyes was on him now. The same faces that had mocked him an hour ago now watched him with a different kind of intensity. Part awe, part disbelief, part guilt. He wasn't sure which made him feel worse. Malik was still seated at the defense table. Tyler walked over to him slowly, each step feeling like it echoed through history. A bailiff started to move toward him, but then hesitated, like everyone else, unsure where the line was anymore. Malik turned in his seat. He was still wearing the orange jumpsuit, still cuffed at the ankles and wrists, but something in his posture had changed. Less guarded, less defeated. "You really did that?" he asked, voice low, as if afraid speaking louder would shatter the moment. Tyler nodded once. "Yeah." Malik looked down, then shook his head with a quiet laugh. "You're insane." Tyler half smiled. "Takes one to save one." But the moment of quiet between them was shattered when the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open and the clerk returned with a printed transcript in her hands. She approached the judge's empty bench and carefully laid the transcript in his place. The full documentation of the submitted video footage, certified, date-stamped, and now officially entered into the court record. A journalist in the gallery scribbled furiously into her notepad. 2 others had already pulled out phones to begin typing. One of them whispered, "This'll be front page by tomorrow." The prosecutor approached the defense table, his jaw tight. "This changes the timeline," he muttered, half to himself, half to Davis. "We can't prove Malik was even near the scene anymore." "No kidding," Davis said quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. For the first time, Tyler saw fear in their faces. Not fear of a threat, but fear of exposure. Fear that their failure, their laziness, their assumptions had nearly sent an innocent man to prison. A second clerk returned with a court order. Temporary suspension of trial proceedings pending evidentiary review. As she walked past Tyler, she didn't look at him, but she did hesitate for a half second, then whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Nice job." He blinked, stunned. He'd never heard kindness from anyone in that building before, not until today. Eli, the janitor, had slipped into the back of the room again. He stood near the emergency exit, arms crossed, watching with quiet pride. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Tyler saw it clearly. That look wasn't just respect. It was recognition. Malik stood, still cuffed, and turned to the bailiff. "Do I get to leave?" he asked. The bailiff looked toward the clerk, who nodded. "You'll be released under supervision pending the review," she said. "We'll finalize the paperwork now." As Malik was led out to the side room for processing, he turned back toward his little brother. "I'll see you outside," he said, a small grin cracking through the exhaustion. Tyler nodded but said nothing. He didn't trust himself to speak. His throat had gone dry and emotion sat heavy in his chest. Not sadness, not joy. Something deeper. Something that felt like justice but hurt all the same. Then the sound of slow clapping. Just once. Then again. One of the older spectators stood, her voice cracking. "That boy just did more for justice than any lawyer in this room." It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't that kind of story. But it was acknowledgement. A shift in how Tyler Brooks would be remembered. And for someone who had been treated like a criminal for speaking the truth, that shift meant everything. The clerk handed him a printed copy of the court's order, now amended with the official motion he had filed. It had his name on it, in black ink, in a real file. He had become part of the legal record, and no one could erase that. He stood alone in the courtroom as people began to file out once more. But this time, they weren't whispering about how much trouble he was in. They were whispering his name like it meant something. Outside, the afternoon sun hit him like a wave. It was warmer than he expected. Brighter, even. The kind of day you never notice unless you've spent hours under fluorescent lights and wood-paneled ceilings. Linda Cartwright, his foster mother, was nowhere in sight. No surprise there. But Malik was. Still in a state-issued tracksuit, but free. He jogged up to Tyler, cuffs now gone, eyes wide. "I still don't get how you did it." Tyler pulled out his worn notebook and tapped it. "I don't sleep much." Malik laughed again, for real this time, and threw an arm around Tyler's shoulder. "I owe you my life." Tyler looked at him. "You don't owe me anything. You just need to live it now." They stood there a moment longer, just the two of them in front of the courthouse steps. Then a voice behind them broke the moment. "You planning on going to law school?" They turned. Judge Monroe was descending the stairs slowly, out of his robe, dressed in a conservative gray suit. He looked tired, but also curious. "I don't know," Tyler replied. "You should," Monroe said. "You just passed the hardest test of all, not the bar. Integrity." Tyler didn't reply. He wasn't ready to make promises, not yet. But for the first time, he was ready to believe in the possibility.